So at this point I need to reinforce these handles. I might be able to get away without doing it, but I think it's safer to do a little bit of reinforcing that's pretty easy to do anyway than to worry about this wanting to lift and separate. Now if you look at the way this integral handle is built into it, there's basically a 1/4 inch thick piece of wood on the top here, and then of course all the rest of the bulk. Now this 1/4 inch piece really only goes back to about here. So you got a strip maybe 2 inches wide, you know, on average, that's a 1/4 inch thick on the top. Now, of course, this is all, it's not glued on, it's all part of the wood, but of course you could lift the fibers. So you could very much picture this, if I were to use these 2 pieces of scrap, you could picture that these 2 pieces are together, kind of like that, like this rabbet, but then as the years go by and I go lifting it, you're going to see it's going to want to pull the fibers away from there. So I want to prevent that. Now there's 2 ways that I'm going to reinforce this, and it turns out that I can do them simultaneously, so it makes it kind of easier anyway. The outside of these drawers, of course, I'm going to be applying a finish. That'll actually be in another episode. I'm going to need to have some finish here on the inside. So what I plan on doing is I'm going to mix some thin epoxy, and I'll just be painting it on the inside of this handle. Now that's going to absorb into the end grain here and get sucked in quite far. And also it's going to absorb right here at sort of the boundary between the 2 parts. So in a way it'll be, you know, right here is where it'll get absorbed as well, and that'll help glue these 2 layers together a little bit. I mean, they're not 2 layers, but I don't want them to separate into 2 layers. So with the epoxy there, of course, the handle will stay clean anyway, and it's a nice finish. Now the second way I want to reinforce it is basically I want to do something that's going to bind this kind of top layer to the bottom layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a drill bit and I'm going to drill up from the bottom of this drawer section until I get just close to the top. And what this is I want to go beyond where this rabbet is. So if you were to look at it from the front, this is basically where I want to go. I want to go about midway through this top segment. Now there's not a lot of leeway there, so I have to get that depth just perfect. So then in that hole, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run some of these round toothpicks. This is actually a really strong toothpick. They're even hard to break. But I'm going to be running these up into the hole, so then basically it's going to be attaching, you know, it's going to be kind of acting like a cross ply in a way. It's going to be keeping all these pieces from being able to separate. So I'll be beating this with possibly, you know, 4 or 5, depending on how wide the drawer is. I'll put, you know, probably one no further than 3/4 of an inch from the other one. Once you have the depth set, it's pretty easy to just go across there and pin a bunch of them. And then when I paint the epoxy into the handle here, I'll just simply put some drops of epoxy into those holes and then push these toothpicks in. It turns out these are some decorative ones, so they actually have some little notches near the top that are actually going to help pull the epoxy in and help bind the whole thing together. So in effect, what that's going to be doing is it's going to be acting like a pin. You know, in a way you could think of it like a barbed nail or something like that that goes up in here, holding all these layers together, so that this thing here will have a much more difficult time trying to separate. And all those holes are going to be on the underside of the drawer. So after the epoxy sets, you know, I can take a chisel just to clear off any excess that might be sticking up. But then that's going to be glued against the front of the drawer. So you'll never see it anyway, but the enforcement is on the inside. So that's what I'm going to do now. I've taken a caliper and measured the toothpick, and actually it turns out that a 3/32 drill bit is going to give it a little bit of clearance, so some epoxy can go up on the sides, which is just perfect. And we're going to go through all the drawers and do that. So now that I've got it all set up, I did a little bit more finessing, you know, when I got a chance to try some of these. 1 or 2 of them was just a little bit tighter than I wanted to, but now I've got them just perfect. So what I want to do is the next step is going to be the glue up, but I want to put some finish down here. you can see that inside this handhold, it's going to be awfully difficult to get the finish on this little part here after the fact, when you've got to go kind of dig in there yourself. I mean, sure, you could paint it in there with a little tiny whip brush, but it'd be nicer to do a nicer job of doing the finish. So what I'm going to do is, this is already lined up onto its outside edge where we're going to normally have it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take each one of these, and I'll take this one just as an example. I'll slide this away and slide this away. Now I'm just going to back this guy here up a little bit, and now I'm going to trace a line where this is revealed on the underlying drawer. So you can't see this pencil line there, but there's a pencil line here, and basically when I go to glue this in place, it's going to be covering that line because I backed it up about 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back into its normal position, do the same with this, slide it over and make a line, slide it over the other direction, make a line. Basically, I want a number of lines that are going to show, that are going to be wider than the exposed part. Then what I can do is I can just take some armor seal. I'm just going to apply some armor seal between the lines, do a little bit of wet sanding so that it'll look the same as the rest of these surfaces when they're done. And then afterwards, when we do the glue up, everything will look beautifully finished, and I won't have to go and do that nuisance. It'll actually be really quick and dirty to do these little sections here, because it'll only take one coat to do the sanding, and then another coat afterwards will be pretty much enough for doing that inside part, because it'll be pretty thick varnish. Hard to make out on the camera, but all of these have their lines. So basically I'll be putting some varnish in between here, in this swipe here, and this stripe here, 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 and here. So I'll just I'll hit that with a little bit of the armor seal, and then I'm going to hit it with some 600 grit paper while the armor seal is on there, just a little bit, rubbing it in this little area here. It doesn't matter if I go a little bit beyond the lines. The lines are just some guidance. And now I do want to actually keep this center section pretty much raw, because I do want a better glue joint. I'll get a better glue joint raw wood to raw wood than I will with some finish, but if there's a little bit underneath there, it's not going to cause any problems at all. So I realized I said armor seal earlier, but I meant to say Sealacell. What I like to do with mahogany especially is I like to do 2 coats of Sealacell first, and I'll do them as sanded coats. Now I'll show you how to do the sanding when I get to the bigger panels, because you'll get to see it a lot more than on this little section. But it really brings out the depth of the mahogany, and it makes it just glass smooth. So, and then after the Sealacell, then I usually just go to an armor seal, one that's a kind of more protectant. They're actually really close. It does seem like the gloss on the armor seal is a little nicer. So I have some wet dry 600 grit paper here. We're just gonna go and, I mean, there's some very small sections here, so it's not gonna take a heck of a lot of this stuff. Normally I wouldn't be dunking in the can, but I'm just going to be putting this on and then closing the can off as I go to do some of the sanding. So just go with the grain. The goal is to make a slurry, and the slurry is going to be this messy concoction on the surface, but you don't care because it's going to be filling in the grain. Now again, on this little tiny surface it's going to be a little hard to see. When we get to the big one, it's going to be really obvious. You know, it'll actually look like a mess and you'll think you'll have screwed everything up, but that's actually what you want. Note that I'm not really getting rid of the slurry either. I'm kind of leaving it there for now. I want it to soak in, because I'm going to be adding a little bit more and sanding a little bit more. And also this is full strength, which is nice because I'm going to do 1 coat sanded like this, and then I'm going to apply a little bit more tomorrow before heading off to work, just so that I can basically have 2 full strength coats on this. A little bit more will sneak in when I do the main panels, but there'll be plenty in there to protect this area. So definitely give it a try on any of these type of woods, like the medium pour woods, walnut being a good one as well. It changes the look of the walnut for sure. The mahogany I think actually ends up looking nicer. It certainly feels nicer. It pretty much goes right to the amazing category. That's feeling really glass smooth now. So that's basically it. What I'm going to do now is just wipe off the excess that's on here. There's a little bit of excess outside the lines of where I went. I just don't want those to become kind of globs. I mean, I'm trying to wipe across the grain because I don't want to scoop out the slurry. I want that slurry to stay in there, but that's feeling really good. All right, that's it. So it doesn't look like much right now, but this first coat was the sanded coat, because of course now with the finish, once this thing sets up, we're not really going to be able to sand and fill too much. The second time, if you were to sand and fill, you're only going to be filling in those little tiny divots that you didn't get. So you really want to try getting the sanding and filling part done on the first coat. So now that I got these two done, we'll do the next two. So the front's got their little marks of finish going. This is only the first coat. I'll put the second coat on, then we'll get a couple things ready for doing the glue up. For the next episode is when I'll actually do the application of the drawer front, and then I'll go through doing the finishing of the side panels and the drawer front. So we'll go through all the wet sanding and how to progress through the through the grits of the wet sanding, and also the different mix ratios. Here I was applying the Seal-A-Cell on straight because I just want to get it over with 2 quick coats. It's inside somewhere where you can't see it, and it's still going to look really good. But for these outside ones, we really want to get the depth out of it, and that takes a little bit of a different finishing schedule than just applying the Seal-A-Cell straight. So we'll do that one for next time. Thanks.